The Dollmaker's Curse. Emily. The voice was soft, almost like a breath. Emily froze in her bed. The room was dark except for the weak glow of the nightlight plugged into the wall. Her parents were asleep down the hall. The house was quiet. But there it was again. Emily. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure the whole house could hear it. She turned her head toward the shelf near her desk. The whisper was coming from the doll. It sat perfectly still, an old-fashioned porcelain doll with glass eyes and a faded blue dress. Its hair looked too real, too human, the kind that tangled easily. Emily pulled the covers to her chin, her lips trembling. The doll's mouth didn't move, but the whisper filled the room again. "Emily, come closer." The girl shook her head. "No," she whispered back without thinking. Then the doll blinked. Emily gasped and buried her face under the blanket. The blanket wasn't much protection. She could still hear it breathing. The doll was alive. And then, bang! The door to her bedroom slammed shut. Emily screamed, but the scream never left her throat. Because something else whispered. Another voice, lower, older. "She knows too much." Weeks earlier, before the doll had ever arrived, life had been simple. Emily lived in a small town in Ohio, a place where people waved to each other at the grocery store and kids rode bikes down cracked sidewalks. Her dad worked at the post office, and her mom ran a tiny thrift shop that smelled like old books and perfume. Emily was 11 years old, a curious kid who loved sketching and reading scary stories, even though they kept her awake at night. She was the kind of girl who collected shiny rocks from the driveway and named them like pets. One rainy afternoon, she was helping her mom at the thrift shop when something strange happened. A man came in. He wore a long gray coat even though it wasn't cold, and his shoes left muddy prints on the floor. He walked straight to the counter and set down a box. "For the children," he said in a thick accent Emily didn't recognize. His voice was raspy, like leaves being crunched underfoot. Her mom frowned. "What's this?" The man didn't answer. He simply turned, pushed the door open, and walked into the rain. Inside the box was the doll. It looked old, older than anything in the store. Its glassy eyes seemed too real, and its mouth had tiny cracks across the lips. Emily reached out to touch its hair and pulled her hand back immediately. It felt like real hair. That night, Emily asked if she could keep the doll. Her mom shrugged. Better someone keep it than let it gather dust in the shop. Emily carried it home, not realizing what she had just brought into her life. For the first few days, the doll sat quietly on her shelf. It was creepy, sure, but it didn't do anything. Emily even showed it to her best friend, Sarah, who laughed and said it looked like something from an old horror movie. But by the end of the week, strange things began to happen. Emily woke up one morning to find the doll on her desk, even though she remembered leaving it on the shelf. Another time, she swore she heard footsteps in her room at night, but when she turned on the light, no one was there. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, like the wind through the window. But soon they grew clearer. The doll whispered her name. And on that terrible night, when the door slammed shut, the whispers grew louder. Emily pulled the blanket from her face just enough to peek. The doll wasn't on the shelf anymore. It was sitting on the floor, closer to her bed. And its head was slowly turning toward her. The doll's head turned slowly, its glass eyes catching the glow of the nightlight. Emily's body went stiff. She couldn't even breathe. The doll's mouth didn't move, but its whisper filled the air again. "Emily, let me play." Her stomach dropped. She wanted to scream for her parents, but her voice was trapped. Her throat felt heavy, like invisible fingers pressed against it. The doll tilted its head. "Emily." Then, without warning, it slid forward on the floor. Just a few inches, but enough to make Emily's heart nearly explode. That was it. She ripped the blanket away and bolted out of bed. Her feet slapped against the carpet as she ran for the door. She grabbed the knob and twisted. Locked. Her bedroom door never locked. It didn't even have a keyhole. Emily yanked harder, tears burning her eyes. "Mom! Dad!" she cried. Behind her, the doll's tiny porcelain feet tapped against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. It was walking. Emily spun around just in time to see it stop, standing straight in the middle of the room. Its cracked mouth opened wider than before. "She knows too much," the deeper voice whispered again. Emily pressed her back against the door. "Stay away," she said in a shaky whisper. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the doll collapsed. It lay on the floor like an ordinary toy, glass eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Silence. Emily's parents burst into the room a moment later, wide-eyed. Her mom pulled her close while her dad searched the room. "There's nothing here," he said, trying to sound calm. "You just had a nightmare." But Emily shook her head. She pointed at the doll. "It moved. It whispered my name." Her dad sighed, picked up the doll, and set it back on the shelf. "It's just a toy, Emily." Emily didn't argue. She was too scared to. But when her parents tucked her back in, she couldn't sleep. Because the doll was Smiley, Nung now. The next morning, Emily tried to convince herself it had all been a bad dream. She got dressed, packed her backpack, and walked to school with Sarah. But she couldn't stop thinking about the doll. At lunch, she leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "What if the doll's haunted?" Sarah laughed, chewing her sandwich. "You've been watching too many horror movies. Dolls don't whisper." Emily frowned. "What if they do?" "Okay," Sarah smirked. "Then bring it to school tomorrow, and we'll see for ourselves." Emily shook her head. "No way. I don't want it near me." But that night, when she got home, the decision was made for her. Because the doll was already sitting on her desk with her backpack open, and inside the backpack, tucked neatly between her books, was a slip of paper. In messy handwriting, it read, "I want to meet Sarah." Emily's blood ran cold. She didn't write it. She crumpled the paper, stuffed it deep into the trash, and shoved the backpack under her bed. That night, the whispers came back. But this time there were two voices. The doll's faint one, and the older, raspier one. "She doesn't believe. She must believe." Emily pressed her hands over her ears, tears rolling down her face. The voices only grew louder. And then, crack! The lamp on her nightstand shattered as if an invisible hand had smacked it. Glass sprinkled across the floor. Emily screamed for her parents again. Her dad came running, his face pale when he saw the mess. "How did this happen?" he asked. Emily pointed at the doll, her voice shaking. "It's cursed." Her mom exchanged a nervous glance with her dad. "Emily, stop scaring yourself." But Emily wasn't scaring herself. She knew what she heard, and the doll was no longer sitting on the desk. It was perched neatly on her pillow. "Sarah?" Emily's eyes flew open. The whisper wasn't calling her name anymore. She sat up in bed, heart hammering, sweat sticking to her forehead. The doll sat on her pillow, glass eyes glinting in the dark. It tilted its head. "Sarah," the soft voice repeated. Emily clutched the blanket to her chest. "Leave her alone," she hissed. The older voice answered, crawling through the room like smoke. "She must believe." Emily shoved the doll off the bed. It hit the floor with a thud, porcelain arms twisting at unnatural angles. But the smile never left its cracked lips. That was the last straw. Emily grabbed the doll and stuffed it deep into her closet, burying it under old sweaters. She slammed the door shut and leaned against it, chest heaving. But as soon as she crawled back into bed, knock, knock, Knock. The sound came from inside the closet. Emily pulled the covers over her head and prayed until her eyes finally drifted shut. The next morning at school, Emily felt dizzy, like she hadn't really slept. She sat beside Sarah in the cafeteria, pushing her cereal around with her spoon. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You look like you fought a ghost last night." Emily glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Sarah, the doll said your name." Sarah laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind she used when she wasn't sure what to say. "That's creepy." "I'm serious." Emily's hands shook. "I think it wants you." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Fine. Bring it over to my house after school. I'll prove it's just a doll." Emily's stomach twisted. Every part of her wanted to scream no, but Sarah was her best friend. If she refused, Sarah would never believe her. "Okay," Emily whispered. That afternoon, Emily carried the doll in a shoebox to Sarah's house. She didn't want to touch it. She didn't even want to look at it. Sarah snatched the box as soon as Millie arrived. "Let's see this haunted doll." She plopped it onto the living room table and lifted the lid. The doll stared up at them. Blue dress wrinkled, glass eyes too bright. Sarah leaned close. "Hello, creepy doll. My name's Sarah. Are you going to haunt me?" Emily's throat tightened. "Don't." But Sarah laughed and set it upright on the table. "See? Just porcelain and paint." The lights flickered. Both girls froze. Then came the whisper, faint but clear. "Sarah." Sarah's smile vanished. She glanced at Emily. You did that, right?" Emily shook her head. The doll's mouth creaked open. "Sarah." Sarah stumbled backward, bumping into the couch. Nope, not funny." Emily grabbed her friend's arm. "I told you," she cried. Before Sarah could answer, the TV in the corner switched on by itself. Static filled the screen, hissing through the room. Letters scratched across the screen, glowing white against the noise. "Property of Aleksei Volkov." Emily's skin crawled. "Who's Aleksei Volkov?" The whispering grew louder. The doll's cracked smile widened unnaturally, showing tiny porcelain teeth. Sarah screamed. The lights went out. In the darkness, both girls heard the older voice again, clearer than ever. "She belongs to the Dollmaker." When the lights came back on, the doll wasn't on the table anymore. It was sitting on Sarah's lap. Her arms were locked tight around it as if she couldn't let go. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling. "Emily," Sarah whispered, voice shaking. I can't move." Emily lunged forward, trying to yank the doll away, but it clung to Sarah like it had grown roots. And when Emily looked closer, she froze. Strands of Sarah's hair were missing, and they were woven neatly into the doll's head. "Emily, help me." Sarah's voice trembled. She sat stiffly on the couch, arms locked around the doll as though in V. Cybele ropes held her there. Strands of her hair were missing, braided neatly into the doll's scalp. The doll's glass eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "She belongs to the Dollmaker," the older voice whispered again, rumbling deep inside the room. Emily's heart thundered. "Let her go," she shouted, pulling on the doll's arm. But no matter how hard she yanked, it wouldn't budge. Sarah whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. Then the TV flickered again, showing not static, but a black and white image. A man's face appeared, thin, pale, with hollow eyes and a long gray beard. His voice came through the static. "I am Aleksei Volkov. My work lives forever." Emily froze. The name from the screen. It was real. She remembered something she had read in one of her mom's old thrift shop books about cursed objects. There was a story about a Russian doll maker in the 1800s who used real human hair and teeth in his creations. They said he wanted to give his dolls souls, so he stole from the living. When he died, his dolls were buried with him, but some were stolen, scattered across the world. Emily's stomach churned. Could this doll be one of them? The man's voice grew harsher. The girl must stay. A new soul for my collection. Sarah's lips trembled. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Emily, don't let it take me. Emily's hands shook, but she remembered something else from the book. Cursed objects could sometimes be broken by fire, or by returning them to where they came from. She grabbed the shoebox the doll had arrived in and stuffed her hands under Sarah's arms, trying to free the doll. We're not keeping you, she yelled. You don't belong here. The lights exploded overhead, showering sparks. The living room grew dark except for the glow of the TV. The dollmaker's voice roared. She is mine! Emily screamed and shoved with all her strength. Finally, the doll slipped loose, though clumps of Sarah's hair tore free with it. Emily stuffed the doll into the box and slammed the lid shut. Instantly, the room fell silent. Ara gasped, clutching her head. It hurt me. Emily hugged her tight. I've got it. I'm going to end this. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She sat awake with the shoebox clutched against her chest. Every so often, the box shuddered, as if something inside was trying to claw its way out. At dawn, she made her decision. She would destroy it. She sneaked out while her parents still slept, Sarah beside her. They carried the box into the woods behind the neighborhood, where no one would see. Emily dropped it on the ground and grabbed a heavy rock. Her arms shook as she raised it. Are you sure? Sarah whispered, her face pale. Emily nodded. It's the only way. She slammed the rock down. The box cracked. Porcelain shattered inside. For a moment, silence. Then the air grew icy cold. A scream erupted, not from the box, but from the trees around them. The voice of Aleksei Volkov echoed through the woods. You cannot break what is eternal. The box burst open. Shards of porcelain scattered into the grass. The doll's body lay broken, but its head rolled forward and stopped at Emily's feet. Its glass eyes blinked, and it whispered one last time, Emily. That night, Emily tried to convince herself it was over. She returned home, burned what was left of the doll's body in the fire pit, and watched the smoke curl into the sky. But when she finally crawled into bed, exhausted and sore, her blood ran cold. Sitting on her pillow was the doll's head. Its cracked mouth stretched wide into a grin. And in Sarah's voice, it whispered, I'll see you tomorrow.